Are you ready to 3D your machine?
Put together.
Today we're going to be going through the entire process of setting up 3D with BetaFlight and BLHeli. If you're running KISS, then check out the video that I filmed with my friend Steve Price in the description below. Between these two videos, you should be able to get almost any machine to fly with 3D. Some will work better than others, and it's very ESC and motor dependent. Though most modern ESCs with D-shot support will work well. It's not a prerequisite, but the motors do switch better and it requires less setup to make it work correctly. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is flash it to the latest and greatest BetaFlight or BetterFlight. For this build, I need to jump the bootloader pads, so I've soldered a piece of wire onto them on the stack. Depending on your flight controller, you might have to use either jump the bootloader pads or in most cases just use the bootloader pin, which is just holding down a button, and that should hopefully be enough to flash the flight controller. But on the Super F4 stack, it's a little bit buried, so you kind of have to get down inside of it to really get in there. So be a little bit careful when you're doing this if you're using the Super F4 stack. It's very, very tight, and there's a lot of places where you can like accidentally hit other electronics. So keep that in mind if you're using the stack. We're going to want to plug in the flight controller to our computer using a micro USB cable. If you're unfamiliar with this, I might say you might want to watch a different video on flashing BLHeli and BetaFlight, but this video will cover how to do that. Now that we're connected up to our flight controller, we're going to go into BetaFlight, and we should have the DFU mode selected up at the top, and or whichever port you are connected to, depending on your flight controller. And we're going to go down, scroll down to our flight controller of choice. In my case, it's going to be the Omnibus F4, which, you know, is a pretty sexy little flight controller. So right now, the stable releases are going up to 3.31. As of 3.32 and or 3.4, that is when the fix for 3D mode should be available. So if you're watching this video right now and this is what you're currently seeing and 3.4 is not available, go check the link in the description for the Outer Limits chat room. This is a chat room that a bunch of 3D pilots hang out in, and you can't see it, but there's like 30 people online right now. And this is where some of the 3D magic has happened lately. So if you want help for 3D mode, come check that out. Otherwise, hopefully the fix is live and you don't need to come in the chat room and ask us for a custom file. But if you need it, it might be there. And thank you, Trasis, for all the hard work you've been doing. So on that note, I have to use a file that is currently not available, which means I'm going to load firmware locally. This should pop up my little menu here. And I'm going to load up this one right there. So this is a custom hex, and again, you can get this custom hex file for your flight controller built for you if it's not out yet in the chat room. But I'm hoping that by the time this video comes out, you can just go down to the firmware list and pick out 3.4 from the menu and flash it by clicking Load Firmware Online. So once your firmware is loaded, you're going to click Flash Firmware, and you should see at the bottom it should say Erasing. And we're going to let that erase. Erase. And this process is going to take a few seconds. And if you have a problem through this point, don't fret. 9 times out of 10 you can rescue the board. This is just flashing the data that's on it. So if you end up bricking the board, quote unquote, There's ways to save it, but you might need an FTDI tool. I've never really had that problem, but it is something that happens from time to time. That being said, you really shouldn't be worried about flashing these boards. Even if you flash it with an improper target, the likelihood of actually causing damage to the board is very minimal. Right on, now that I have the board flashed, I'm going to unsolder the bootloader pins and connect it up back to BetaFlight, and we can continue on with configuring the board and setting up 3D mode. Okay, now that we're connected up to BetaFlight, we're going to need to go in and configure all of our settings. This is basically tab by tab. If you have previous settings, I recommend essentially backing up and restoring them before doing this process. But I like having my settings restored manually by me. So I'm using D-Shot 600 on this build. And motor idle throttle, I like setting it to 5. The yaw on this one, for some reason, is 90 degrees. So if you have the Super F4 and for some reason it's not flying right, that would probably be the reason. I'm going to turn off the accelerometer, barometer, and magnetometer. That way we can arm it upside down in case we crash. I'm going to call mine Little Red. That's what it has been called since the beginning. And then we have our receiver. It's going to be a serial-based receiver and S-bus. And then 3D mode. So for this, and again, we don't have our ESC set up for this yet. We're just configuring the flight controller. We're going to get it into ESC set up shortly. I like setting it to 1488, and this really only matters if you're using one shot. If you're using D-Shot, these values are automatically set for you. So yeah, there's like a whole extra step to do this process, but I found the best values for me and most builds are this. So it's 1538 for deadband high, 1438 for deadband low, and 1488 for deadband neutral. I found this setting works really, really well for one shot. And we're going to go into the whole process of tuning the ESCs. This is the first of like 3 steps. So once we have that set, we're going to hit save and reboot. Actually, I want to turn on the dynamic notch filter. If you haven't done that yet, I definitely recommend trying out the dynamic filter for BetaFlight. Hit save, go back in. PID tuning, this is, up to you. I like the stock settings. They seem to work really well. For RC rate and all that good stuff, I'm going to go up just a little bit. Just a little bit. I like nice nimble setup. 888. Yep. And then we're going to go on super rate, less on yaw, and more RC rate. It's a little bit more smooth. And I don't know. I don't like super snappy yaw movements. So cool. That's about right. And then RC Expo, I like adding about 42. Which is the meaning of life, if you don't know. And again, I like adding some expo on yaw. This just really smooths out all the flying and makes it really kind of buttery. Hit save. And these settings are pretty good for freestyle and pretty good for racing. It's kind of a nice mix of rates. And really, this isn't 3D mode. This is just what I like to fly. And then on this, I need to change it to tear because I like to use, at one point in time I flew Spectrum and I was migrating my equipment and that was the default setting. You're going to add a little bit of RC deadband, I found. Just makes it a little bit better. And then you have the 3D throttle deadband. And this setting is really dependent on what you want to do. I like setting it to 3, and this is basically where middle of the stick, nothing happens. I don't like that. I like having the fine line where if I cross that line, the motors go the other direction, and if they're above that line, they're going the other direction. So I don't like this weird zone in the middle where it's not, symmetrical. So essentially, I like to reduce this to 3. Now this also has the effect of making it more difficult to arm the machine. Essentially, you have to have that throttle value at 0%, very much in the middle. And if you're off by just a little bit, it won't arm. So I tend to actually search around just a little bit to find the right spot, and the machine will arm. Now this is almost a safety measure because it keeps you from accidentally arming the machine and only arming when you're absolutely ready. Versus, oh, you're in the throttle range and it, I don't know, starts up. Cool, so I'm going to hit at 4. That's a really, really small amount. We're going into the mode tab. We're going to add an arm range like you normally would. Nothing really special here. If you like anti-gravity or air mode, now is your time to add them. I like putting them on aux number 1. So you have the ability to have air mode and anti-gravity, or without air mode and anti-gravity. And then on aux 2, we're going to set up the disable 3D switch. And that's going to be essentially the default of the machine will have 2D mode. So the default switch position is the lower end here in the values. So when I turn on the transmitter, the machine will fly in 2D mode like it normally would. And when I flick on aux 2 and it raises the value into the higher range, essentially the machine will then be in 3D mode and you can fly it in 3D. So this allows you to fly in 2D and 3D at the flip of a switch. And the cool benefit being is you can actually hit the switch while you're flying and it'll actually change the machine from 2D to 3D midair. Be careful when you do that. It's a little bit tricky, but it does work. So you're going to hit save. Now that we have the flight controller configured, we're going to connect up the machine to BLHeli Suite and configure our ESCs for 3D. All right, now that we're in BLHeli Configurator, we're going to hit connect. And at this point in time, you're going to want to connect a battery up to your drone. This supplies power to the ESCs so you can read the setup. Once it's connected, we're going to hit read setup. And this should give you our default screen. So right now you are seeing essentially the default of BLHeli Suite. If you have not done so already, now is a good time to hit flash all and update your ESCs to the latest settings. If you have not done that already, now is the good time to do it. Pending that, the only thing you should notice that's different than mine is the reversed on ESC number 3. For some reason, I didn't have the ESC wiring set up right, so I hit reversed so I could change around the motor direction without having to swap around some wires. On that being said, you can still get 3D mode working even with that setup. So just take a note of it. It's going to make sense here in a second. So on the motors, you're going to go to bidirectional for one-shot mode or bidirectional reversed if you're using D-shot. Since we're using D-shot on this build, I'm going bidirectional reversed. Now on the one motor that is reversed, you're going to have to go bidirectional, which would be the reverse of bidirectional reversed, which is really confusing, I know, but that's why I'm trying to make a real big note of it right now so you know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. On the last ESC, we're going to do bidirectional reverse too. Now you're going to see the PPM center throttle and PPM max and minimum. We've already set these up on the flight controller to match this, and these settings will only matter if you're using one shot. If you're using D-shot, these settings are automatically hard built into the protocol. So you're going to hit right setup. And once it's written, we're going to disconnect. And we're going to go over into the workbench here. I have a transmitter. Now, leaving the machine still plugged in and powered up, we're going to put on a couple propellers. Now, do not do this if you're using a 5-inch rig, and if you are using a 5-inch rig, then make sure you do not secure the propellers down onto the machine, okay? We're just adding weight onto the propellers to make sure the actual motor is propped and has load. So once you have your propellers just kind of loosely mounted, see they're not actually like turning the motor, it's just sitting there. We're going to flip our 3D switch, hit arm, and we're going to hit the throttle and see if we can get the motors to like not work. So that works. That's not bad. As the default settings, we notice that everything works hunky-dory. I want to see if we can make it work better. So if your machine isn't working right and you're having issues, you're going to have to go through this process. So going back over into our desktop, we're going to go and hit connect. And again, we have left the machine plugged in and we haven't done anything as unplugging the machine. And it's on the workbench. And again, if you're using a 5-inch machine, please make sure you do not put the prop nut on. So if the machine does start to try to spin up, there won't be any major damage. So the biggest thing that we're going to want to change is the motor startup power and possibly the motor timing. I kind of like where the motor timing's at. It's not bad, as you saw it worked fine earlier. But I want to see if we can make it work better. So let's actually just leave that there for now and focus on startup power. So startup power essentially supplies more current to the power or the motor to get it to spin up initially. Let's try 1.0 and see what that does. And we're going to go back over to the motor and basically try to spin it up and see how it reacts. So once that's done, we're going to disconnect. We're going to go over to the workbench. So it's kind of hard to see because this one prop isn't connected and it's kind of free spinning. See, the motor beneath it is still spinning up. But this one is switching much faster. Okay, let's try motor startup power and change it up a little bit. So the words out of my mouth do not make sense. Let's increase the motor startup power to 1.5 and hit right setup. And then disconnect, go back over to our workbench. Why won't you just focus? See, the camera doesn't like me. Finally got one motor to jam up. Okay. Motors all feel nice and chill. We're going to go back to our desktop. We're going to connect it up to the BLHeli suites. Hit read setup. And now we're going to play with the motor timing. So this one isn't so necessary, but I have found that if you have the motors running a bit smoother, it does help. And so for motor timing, we're going to go down to medium low. Now, generally, the way you tune this is pretty simple. At least the way I've tuned it, and it's by ear. So once you have the setting written, we're going to go back over to the workbench. I'm going to pop up a machine. Ooh, we just got that one motor to fail. So that one motor did fail once. So on that note, we're going to connect it back up to the BLHelis, and we're going to hit the read setup. And then we're going to change from motor timing to medium high and see if that does anything. Also, we're going to make sure to hit brake on stop. I keep forgetting that, but that's also pretty important. I like that. It just stops the motors when you turn it off. Also, when you hit 0 point, it tells the motors to like stop on the 0 point, and I feel like it tends to make things work a little bit better, which might have been causing that one motor to have issues. So now that we have that set, we're going to go back over into our bench. I'm going to do another motor test. Oh, that's way more responsive. Right on! Out of all the settings, those ones seem to work the best. And bam, that's kind of how this works. It's a little bit more of an art than it is a science right now. The default settings tend to work pretty well most of the times. That being said, you can get better performance if you spend a few minutes to try to tune out your ESCs and flight controller. If you're using KISS, please go check out that video on how to set this up on KISS. And thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this informative and you found something from it. Support a Wookiee on Patreon. Watch on their views, follow social media. See the world from a brand new perspective. That's objective. Flying drones, building out paradise, creating new things, blowing things on Zoe. Flying drones, building out paradise, creating new things, blowing things on Zoe. Flying drones, building out paradise, creating new things, blowing things on Zoe. Flying drones, building out paradise, creating new things, blowing things on. Well then, if you want to support more content like this from the Flying Wookiee, please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, follow my videos on AirViews, become my patron on Patreon, join the conversation on Discord, and as always, I've been Zoe FPV. Thank you for watching. Tune in next time.